Good morning, elders of the creator of the universe. Good morning, elders of Jesus, the savior of the world. Good morning, elders of the spirit of all inspiration. I'm delighted to be here, lest you get too excited about your being the basic or the entire reason for that. When I backed my car out of the driveway yesterday, it was one above. And my tires squeaked in the snow, and the drifts were about 3.5 feet high. So it's just lovely to see St. Augustine grass and to see everything green around me. I'm excited about probing with you this morning 3 phenomena that are creating an opportunity for us as elders unlike anything ever before. The primary purpose of probing is to take a look at the church's capacity to not only change our lives and we to change the church's life, but together for us in the church to change the world. I believe it can happen. So let's dive right in, and I'll bring you along as we move, and we can have not only a monologue, but a dialogue together. I'm going to make an argument that the amazing, expansive, essential vocational worlds of elders will create this possibility. Here are the 3 converging changes that are bringing a new era for seniors. First, the age wave, which bringing an increased quantity and quality in older adulthood. We'll look at that a little bit more later. It's creating a new life stage, elderhood, that's unique, long, and generative. And the information age creates a new culture, was mentioned in the sermon, of communication, connections, relationships, consciousness, and influence. That's huge. Let's take a look at the power of the age wave. Quantity. Every day in America, 10,000 more people turn 65. Every day in America, 3,500 pass. Every day in America, there are 6,500 more of us over the age of 65. Huge change just in sheer numbers. But this one, according to Pew, is really fascinating. Longevity. If you live to 65, you have a 67% chance of living to 85. That's 20 years. That's a long period of time. Rusting out is not quick. I want to make an argument that this is more than rusting out. Vitality, nutrition, exercise, medical care, replacements, healthier. I bought a recumbent tricycle. As I'd ride down the street, people wave at me, stop me, and want to see what it is that I have. And so I become a salesperson for Eric's bike shop. I send people to get recumbents. Resiliency, expanded social and psychological supports create durability and quality of life, enhanced body, mind, heart, soul, greater satisfaction and happiness. What's beginning to happen is now we're adding to growing up, growing down, and dying well, which before was simply looked at as something that would happen or something to be afraid of. We'll take a look and see at what that means in just a bit. There's evidence of the age wave everywhere one goes. If I travel around my neck of the woods, the city that I live in, and follow where the cranes are and go to ground zero, more often than not, I'll find a new senior housing being developed. And as that new senior housing develops, I discovered that the waiting list is so long that it may take you 3 months to get in, especially into the memory care units. How are we going to do this? What if I am losing my memory and I lose it quickly? How are we going to deal with this? That's become a new kind of crisis. We'll take a look at that and how the church might have a hand. Home care services In my area, there are over 400 home care services, and some of them are shabby, really shabby. Others are incredibly fine. You're going to hear more about that whole process today. Financial options. 25% of males continue to work, 50% of females work. There are new kinds of investments, reverse mortgages. This is an incredible world. One of the congregations I'm studying has an endowment started by a retired person that began with $750,000, $750,000, an elder. He's talked to his friends. It's now grown to over $7 million. It's split in 3 parts. One of them is for mission now, mission now. One of them is for the poor. He's read the Gospels where Jesus is talking about the poor everywhere. And so in their community, they seek out the poorest of the poor, and 1/3 of the money that's gained from the endowment goes to the poorest of the poor. And 1/3 of the endowment is put away for the future mission of the congregation. These old women and men, as they say in that congregation, are using their means to provide for mission now, to provide for the poorest of the poor, and to provide for the future of the church. And the youth director in the congregation looks around and laments that there are all these gray hairs in the congregation. Little does he know, they're stirring the pot of the world for the sake of Jesus Christ everywhere. You and I and those like us around us are one of the greatest gifts of the Christian church. And we're going to take a look at that now and this afternoon and see what that actually means. Economic impact, we've talked about that. $25 trillion are going to pass from one generation to the next. And one of the interesting elements of that passing is how will the monies of the moderately rich or moderately wealthy be passed on to the next generation. All kinds of people are going after the really rich people and putting together instruments to do that. Poor people won't have it, but people like me who have a little bit that may be left over, how might my monies become an instrument of providing some kind of funding for the future? That hasn't been worked. My congregations become people, instruments, institutions who are helping the world to get a handle on it. And finally, we've got policy and perspectives that we have to work about. Social Security, will it be around for my children? It's not a given. We have some of the finest financiers, both in terms of business and in terms of government, in our congregations. Might we put together elder corps to get at this process? We'll take a look at that. Medical care. Someone looked at me the other day and said, "Are you prepared to die well?" I hadn't thought about it. Then he looked at me and said, "You have 4 classic cars." I'm a car guy. I have a 1955 Chevrolet convertible that was in the Dinosaur Show in 1954 in the fall. I have a picture of Dinosaur sitting in my car. It's like new, it's prime automobile. I have a 1956 Raven Black Thunderbird that was owned by an executive of Detroit of the Ford Motor Company. When I go down to the grocery store in my 56 Thunderbird, I come out from the store, and in the beginning, it was mostly men standing around, first on one foot and then the other, telling stories about the prom and such things. And now women are standing around my car. And so it's a chick magnet. Delightful. I have a 65 Mustang convertible, and the car that I use if I want to go fast is a 66 Corvette. So this person said to me, "How are you going to get rid of your cars?" I hadn't thought about it. But it led me to start talking with my daughter and my sons about passing them on before I get too old to not even be able to drive them. So I've started. Now, that's a foolish example, but there are all kinds of ways of thinking about how, in fact, Sherry and I are going to make the journey into narrow and narrow places so that the way we die is a witness to our children, not a burden, and to others around us in the neighborhood. Are you with me? In terms of how this process is going to take place. Enough of that. Let's take a look at what this is doing. This is the point I want to set before us as we move, because I want to get into why it is that we have the strength and power in congregations to make things move. Elderhood has become a new life stage in 3 phases, and the 3 phases matter the most as we perform in congregations. Beginnings of elderhood are variously set. I've used in the research that I've done with Pew and with other research organizations, 65. It's a long and complex life stage, 20 to 30 years for most people. 3 distinct phases. Now here, early, middle, and later elderhood, critical to know what these are and how they mostly function. Elderhood, unique, substantial, essential, purposeful, powerful. Let me emphasize these words again, because oftentimes it's looked at as one thing. Unique, substantial, essential, purposeful, and powerful. If in our congregations we could unpack each of those characteristics of elderhood, our congregations would become vital and vibrant. We'll take a look at that a bit this morning and this afternoon. Elderhood's physical, mental, social, financial, and spiritual vulnerability. The journey through elderhood is most certainly a journey of vulnerability. Pam will get at that, get at some of these kinds of things and looking at caretaking and caregiving and receiving care in all kinds of ways. But one of the great secrets of moving through the vulnerability is attitude and being together in the process and the way in which we manage the process of vulnerability. Absolutely critical. And so we'll take a look at the church's hand in all of that. I'm not going to spend much time with this morning, but it's critical, and I lay out that process in the book, Elders Rising. I brought some copies along if you should like to purchase one. To get at the fact that even though we each die in our own way or make our way through elderhood in our own way, that there are common characteristics of early, middle, and late elderhood. And to know what those are, and to be able to think ahead and manage those phases is really wise. And the people who do that tend to have good lives in moving through the narrow place, in growing down and dying well. And so one of the centers of information that churches, congregations can bring to the process of elderhood is the knowledge of the phases. And in those phases, we won't go into them now, but it's the middle phase between 75 and 84 where the biggest changes take place that oftentimes in the vulnerability make elderhood most vulnerable. In the book, I lay these out. Now I want to set the turning point. We're people of the Reformation. We're people that have this deep sense that in the narrative, in the work and life of Jesus Christ, God comes into the world and into our lives and turns the world upside down. And so as I come here this morning and you come here this morning, my destiny, your destiny has been decided. I have been baptized. My destiny has been determined, and yours too. My life is a life of grace. Olga and Robert made love with one another, had nothing to do with it. all got pushed and shoved into the birthing process. I had nothing to do with it. I almost died when I was 7 of a ruptured appendix. Lawrence Kanoki landed a Piper Cub in the middle of the winter on skis. They got me into the airplane and he flew me in a snowstorm to Devil's Lake. Half hour later, I was on the operating table and Glenn Toomey saved my life. I could go on and on and on. My life is a life that has been perpetuated by grace. And I would guess that yours too have been perpetuated by grace. So if my life and yours is a factor of the graciousness of God, so then what? What do we do? Luther and Calvin and others said, so you live your life so that others might thrive. You live your life so that others might thrive. So what does that look like? Let's take a look at some of the interesting parts of that process. If salvation and forgiveness that comes with us is a gift, fear, shame, hurt, mess-ups, all of that is graced by God in our full life and death. What then? We live so that the world God loves might thrive. Living in is shaped by faith, callings, contexts, capacities, and relationships. Callings come to self, to family, to church, to friendships, to neighbors, to community and world. These capacities and contexts take place in our unique settings, in our presence with others, in actions and strengths. So I'm married to Sherry. and live at 2352 Sioux Court in New Brighton, Minnesota. My first calling is I am Raleigh, and I have to take care of this weird, long-armed, crooked-nosed guy who wet his bed until he was in 7 years old. And then beyond that, until I was in 14 years old. And I'm not proud of that. It was a mess, but my mother took care of me. So how do I take care of Raleigh so that I can be a healthy human being? Because God made me to be alive and well. I have a calling to eat well, to exercise well, to take care of me. We have a calling to ourselves. Jesus says, love your neighbor as yourself. But then next to me, I have this one who sleeps in the same bed as I do, eats across the table from me. We've been together now 59 years. One of my callings is to be husband. It looks different now when I look across the table at a 79-year-old woman than when I looked across the table at a 22-year-old woman. And I discovered that when I was at Concordia and took kinesiology and anatomy, I was getting ready to give her back rubs at night before she goes to sleep, because it gives her life in her muscles and her back, enables her to sew and quilt and do other things more often and better. Now, you wouldn't do it that way. Maybe you would, but callings are our imagination, looking around where we are, starting with ourselves, and then with those who are closest to us. And from there, ripples that go out from where we are, asking, how do I live my life with my strengths, my awareness in such a way that those around me might thrive? Think about it. What if every congregation unleashed the gospel of grace in such a way that everyone in the congregation looked around at the list of members and looked around when people came to church on Sunday morning asking, so, Pee-Pee, what did she need so she could thrive? And how might I not be nosy or overbearing, but how might I walk alongside of her in such a way that her life be better for this, that she and I belong to the same congregation? What if we as elders thought about our lives in a congregation in such a way that we might ask the question, what does it mean to be an elder in my church, at Christ Lutheran Church, in such a way that all the elders at Christ Lutheran Church in New Brighton, Minnesota could thrive? What might that look like? Well, I suppose it could look like, might we put together a process that's designed in such a way that no elder would drop between the chairs. No elder would ever be completely alone. How many of you have a device? Anyone have a device? Like an iPhone or an iPad or a computer or whatever. Yeah. Think about the ways in which you use it. I do text messages with my grandkids. I talked to Grandpa George, my grandpa, rarely when I was growing up. Now I text my granddaughters and they text me back almost immediately, or they beep me telling me that they've gotten the text. My grandsons, not so much. So with my device, I can communicate with my grandkids. But I can also communicate with other elders. Just amazing. If you go into an Apple store and look around, gray hairs everywhere, mostly in the back with me learning how to use it. What if every group of elders in your congregation were wired or not wired? That is Wi-Fi or whatever. And in the process, we were checking in with each other. Let me tell you the story. In one of my research projects, I visited 52 people between the ages of 62 and 97 and interviewed them about the days of their lives. And I met in those congregations a fellow who was 97 years old. And he had started, in terms of his vocation with elders in his congregation, with being in the elder corps. Dick, do you have a watch on?
Yes, I do.
When it's 11 o'clock, you let me know.
I'll do it.
Okay. He started when he was younger elder, 67 in his congregation, being on the elder corps. And elder corps in his congregation were a group of guys who were fix-it people, handymen, plumbers, and people who loved hammers and saws and squares and such things. And they were available to elders in the congregation to do what, do you suppose? Projects, maintenance. And they discovered that people in those congregations did what? They lived longer in their single dwelling houses because of their churches, elder corps, maintenance guys. After a while, he said it got to be difficult for me to get down on my knees. He said it's about time for me to get out of the elder corps, which he did. And then he started doing Meals on Wheels. Okay, now he's like in his middle elder years. Okay, and then he got to where he got Parkinson's. And they said you shouldn't drive. Reaction time, you know this, such things. So then he started a process whereby they got the congregation's elders, anyone over 65, into some contact process. And he gathered a group of people he would contact on the telephone or via his iPhone. And now at the age of 97, he was still checking in on a group of 9 people every day. Vocation, elderhood, stages of elderhood. His congregation was an anchor community, in part because of Oscar and Oscar's vocation. Dear friends in Christ, congregations with silver-haired people are just so fine, powerful, powerful places. Are you with me? Do you get the idea? Do you get the notion that he's working? Okay. We're going to go more into it this afternoon. So I use Oscar as an example. Let's take elders in general and take a look at their powers. In the studies that I've done with elders, I've noticed 6 strengths that stand out in the lives of elders. In almost every elder, I've discovered these strengths: presence, relationships, purpose, power, passion, playfulness. 6 strengths. Let's take a look, just a quick look at them. Presence, to be with, to be readily and flexibly available, and accompany. Many people who I talked to who were in early elderhood said, finally, I got off the what? The racetrack. Got out of the, one people said to me, other people used to keep my schedule and I danced to someone else's music and the dance was fast and quick and constant. Now I got off the racetrack. I've got some time on my hands. I can make my own schedule, my own choices. Oftentimes retirement can become just the opposite, that is, of not knowing what to do. So now time becomes a gift. One of the people I talked to every week would come and spend a day with a person who had dementia so that her husband could have a day off. And the reason she came was, as the process started, they used angels to come over. And the angels who came over, of course, were new. And the person who had dementia said, I don't want to talk to those people who are strangers. I want to talk to Helen. So they contact Helen. Helen said, I'll come. So Helen came one day a week. And this person who was in the stages of becoming less and less aware now walked into that narrow place with one of her best friends. Because she had the time to be there, picked up the memories, worked with the memories of the past, and so forth. Presence, capacity to be there. Just another piece of that. It was Helen who discovered that the person with the dementia had come to the place where she needed to be in a facility, because she had noticed as the time went by, her husband, who was with her all the way along in the caregiving, didn't notice so much because day to day to day. But when she came a week at a time, she finally said to her best friend who was going into that narrow place, time has come, I think, where you're going to hurt yourself if you continue to try to lift her and take care of her. So she was in the decision-making process. Fascinating. Relationships, connections that sustain and build up oneself and others. We discovered that in a time when secularity has essentially permeated our whole culture, we'll take a look this afternoon at it more deeply, but we'll look at it just a bit this morning. The presence of God as a part of day-to-day living is nearly gone. Most people have no sense of God being a part of their existence. And so people no longer come to church. The nones are the fastest growing group of people in America. One of the parts of the deepness of the faith that still makes a big difference is deep, trusting relationships. And these relationships, if they're genuine and trustworthy and there for the other, have listening in them and so forth, become the occasion for a person to be able to share their faith. Many of the people I interviewed had developed sustaining relationships with their grandchildren. And in that relationship, had told their faith stories to their grandchildren. And it was through telling honestly their sense of God's presence in their life on the basis of the bridge of the relationship that made the difference in the life of their grandchild, that they had come to know faith in Jesus Christ. So there are all kinds of bridges in this process. What if the church became a communion of saints? We're together with one another. We learn from Ladies' Aid, which is what my mom used to call it. Women's groups could teach us about how to sustain, how to listen, how to share our lives in such a way that the fullness of the elders of the congregation became communion, the capacity to talk, listen, and be together with one another. But power of relationships. Dick, how much time do we have? Okay. Why do you get up in the morning? Why do you go on when you're older? And oftentimes society says they're retired, they're old, no need to pay attention to them. I learned in my research that there were two powers of purposefulness. One was having something each day that was purposeful and scheduled. This day I'm going to accomplish A, B, C. And didn't have to be great. Maybe it was just these two things, but people needed a purpose for that particular day. And then secondly, if one listened long enough to them, one would pick up in each of their conversations a larger purpose, a longer purpose for what they wanted to accomplish yet in their lifetime. Pretty easy, I discovered, to pick up with a person that which they had passion about in terms of yet what they wanted to do. And to open up that purposefulness and help them get a handle on what was going on, and to get that released into their lives and into the life of the church was really fun to do. So there's a sense of commitment to a purpose. Power, ability to influence essential societal functioning. I discovered in many congregations, elders were among the people who were consulted before decisions were made. Oftentimes, it wasn't the election of the whole that decided things. It was, if you go talk with so-and-so, if you go talk with so-and-so, so-and-so has the money. And so what is it that elders can do in congregations to think about, listen to the larger whole, and become visionaries of the future of congregations, just to think about congregations? But what about the community in school elections? What about the nation? If we think about voting on the civic good of a community, we're one of the groups that, in fact, vote more prevalently than any others. And so to become informed citizens, critical in the process. One of the congregations I interviewed people in invited local people on all sides of issues and people from the state in the election process to come and be at their congregation. And they had one rule. We want you to get at what is of substance rather than at people's personnel. Get at what the questions are. This congregation in the fall of elections were just jammed with people who came to their adult education hours, because this is one place where the elders called people out if they came and started to slander people, because they wanted a place where folks could come and talk about the issues. Fascinating. Power Power, power. Passion. I'm going to put this one together with the next one. Playfulness. In Tacoma, Washington, I interviewed a woman. She was a co-owner during her lifetime of a pharmacy. And she and her husband went into a community living arrangement. They were in an independent living part of the community care facility. And she was a musician. And she had a sense of humor. And she had a passion about music, good music. And so when she came, because there's no music going on there, she started a musical group. The first group was a women's chorus. There were 5 or 6 women in it. And they started singing together for themselves. And soon the staff asked them to sing for the whole group. And soon the women's chorus grew into a choir. And men wanted to be in the choir. And so they were singing. And pretty soon someone from the local congregation heard that they were singing. And now the choir from the community were singing in the congregation. And after a while, the people said, we should do a musical. So this group of people put on some 1960s play, and they asked, should we do this up at the church? No, someone at the church said, do Jesus Christ Superstar. So this community were doing a piece of Jesus Christ Superstar up at the congregation. And now they got the community care facility connected with the congregation. Finally, they got into the community decided that they would put together a sexy old ladies calendar. So they did. And now some of the congregation said, no. You're not, don't come to the congregation with this. But this woman, in what she did 2 things. First, the congregation started offering spiritual assistance to the community care. And so a relationship developed between the congregation and the community center. And second of all, the meds for depression in the community care facility dropped by 40%. Playfulness. It was interesting to interview her. She looked at me and said, how do you play? I ended up being the interviewer rather than the interviewer. Playfulness. Be interesting to ask, how do you play? And how might that playfulness become a part of the culture of the congregation that you're in? I want to go 2 more places this morning. I want to argue that there's a whole lot at stake in what you're doing here. I'm just delighted to be here and that you're up to this. I've heard about you, both Presbyterian gatherings and what you do, and a part of the board of law. And here's why. Come with me. Will families be able to survive the demands of work, earning a living, child rearing, managing their domestic affairs, and addressing the disruptive challenges of illness, accident, financial setbacks without the contribution of time, attention, and wisdom of elders? I've traveled across the world as a consultant. In almost every culture I've been in, elders have been an integral part of raising the next generation. I'll go just a couple of places with this morning. I'm convinced that one of the essential elements of passing the God story on to the generation once below us, not the parents, but skipping one, I'm convinced that passing on the God story to the generation of our grandchildren is going to be in our hands. because we're among the few who know it. I have a grandson at Yale University. I call him every week, and we have conversations about all kinds of things. As we've had conversations, we've talked about the universe. We've talked about goodness. When is good good? We've talked about what happens when goodness for me clashes with goodness for you. And we've talked about the Jesus story. And now we're on a conversation where he went from being a childhood believer to being an agnostic to being an atheist as he studied science and philosophy. And science led him to becoming a believer again, because when you get behind everything, you get into mystery. And we get into the mystery, the closest discussion of that mystery is the story of a God who created something out of nothing. And when you talk about goodness and what goodness looks like, the story of Jesus is one of the best stories. And so now his grandfather has several times converted his grandson to be a Christian. And it's not about foisting it on him. It's about having a conversation. It's informed with years and years of walking with God. Parents couldn't do it. Sunday school teachers couldn't do it. But he and I had a relationship that we were able to do. Are you with me? This process, your prayers, all of that is going to be largely in your hands. One other story. In the Industrial Revolution, as it came into being, largely in America in the 50s, what was it like? Men went off to work, women stayed home and raised children. Didn't work ultimately. But there was a pattern for raising children. Now both women and men work. What did the pandemic do? It brought out the delicacy of that set of processes in terms of school, working parents, and how to put that delicate process together. Unless we work into that process in some kind of way, I don't know what it is yet, it's not going to be done well. There's a whole set of issues that we need to take up and look at. Let's go to another. I think we in the church can work at that one. Here's another. Serious, deeply serious. Will society be able to educate the young academically, socially, ethically, and spiritually without the financial or financing, attention, and wisdom of elders? Let me tell a story. I interviewed people of a congregation in Nebraska. In the local elementary school, they discovered that children weren't learning to read when the grandfathers did. So we put together a group of grandparents, 3 guys and 2 women in the beginning, that would become teachers' assistants in 1st and 2nd grade to help with teaching children to read. He got the teachers to help them. Pretty soon, other elders learned about it, so now they had eventually an elder teacher or an elder assistant for every child in 2nd and 3rd grade. And their goal was every student would read at a certain level by the time they finished 3rd grade. So they worked at it. 2nd year, they made the goal. But here's what happened. Those kids gained a grandpa and a grandma they never had. Changed the life of the elders, changed the life of fascinating. This is the one we're going to work on this afternoon. Will churches and other community organizations long if elders don't fully join those here in providing adaptive leadership and financial resources, of the God story. And the God story is critical if the church is going to make it into the next generation. Finally, I'll get right on to bare bones in terms of how this will happen. This is what we're going to unpack this afternoon. What I'm doing to get at this is to work at building in congregations a thoroughgoing, vital ministry so elders can be unleashed in the congregation and in the community. And I'll just name them now because we're going to work this afternoon on them. Faith practices, formation, celebration, prayer, and music. I've discovered, and I was just delighted in the worship service because there were 3 songs sung that I listened and you all sang with gusto. They're familiar, they're songs that you all knew. One of the congregations I've interviewed people in, every month they have a congregation that starts, they have a worship service that starts with 4 hymns that are familiar, and they sing only 2 verses. And they have a musical group of elders up front leading the singing. And the church is jammed with gray hair when they do that service. It feeds them. Singing of those hymns feeds their spirit. So one way, many others, prayer of a variety of kinds, of Lexdo Divina, spiritual gifts and strengths. What if, and we're going to talk about this afternoon, what if one was 65, when one became 65 in the congregation, a spiritual gifts inventory was done with every 65-year-old, and it was kept up from there so that everyone from there on was exercising their spiritual gifts in the congregation. I'll tell about some people I interviewed, Phyllis particularly, who was a prayer warrior who transformed her congregation with her spiritual gift. Identity exploration. The problem, I think, with elders' ministry and congregations mostly now is that we have the wrong sense of who elders are. Elders are primarily those of us who come walking in with a walker, which is great, but that isn't all who we are. And that person who comes walking in with a walker may be the 97-year-old who's calling on the telephone, keeping people, in fact, joyfully in all kinds of loyalty to the congregation. We want to change that identity, and we'll look at starting in Scripture and working that in terms of identity. Wellness and wholeness, anchor community, care and caregiving, just delightful. We're going to get at that, yes? Elders in action, essential capacities for maintenance, and elder core. I'm going to stop there. Have you been along? I've moved along quickly through all of this to provide, hopefully, a perspective, a sense of what this can be. Any comments or questions you'd like to make? How much time do we have, Dick?
You've got about 8 minutes.
Okay. Because I'm going to ask you a question I want to make sure you have a chance.
It's a lot to resolve. Our minds are trying to start resolving all of this, I think.
Good, Phyllis. You got something to think about.
Right.
Yeah, good. Yes.
Could you please tell us what you think is biggest or one of the bigger impediments to achieving the kinds of communities that you described?
Yeah. Say it again so people can hear. Stand up.
Could you please describe what you think is the biggest or one of the bigger impediments to achieving the kinds of
Yeah. I think there are two primary. One is in the grassroots. I think throughout our culture as congregations, including me until I had the elders who I interview change me, is that I tended to see elder caregiving as elder ministry. Good, important, critical, but I was too narrow in terms of what I understood elder ministry to be. And as I've interviewed these 54 people across the nation, little by little, these people changed my mind. And I saw a whole other thing. So I went back and I read the whole Bible with elder glasses on. And Anna, Elizabeth. I started meeting all these people that were critical to the God story. And we'll take a look at some of those this afternoon. So I think it's a breaking open of the identity of who elders are. That got attached then to the notion of vocation, which I, as a Lutheran theologian, should have known. Great Scott, I studied it in my head, but I hadn't gotten it into my being as a person who was, when I was doing the research, I was 75 years old. So I think part of it, impediment is grassroots and the thinking that we're stuck in terms of that process. I think the other is structural. The structures we have in my tribe in terms of elders are largely, we'll care for you when you need assistance. And those are great. I mean, we need to have those, but we need to expand what we do in terms of support networks. That's why I'm on the board of Aloha, and why something like this is worth leading the tundra to come down and be in Tampa over. You see what I'm talking about? I think we need to work at it from both ends. That's a great question. Yes.
Is there any magic elixir that would allow church leadership, whatever capacity, to fight the, I want to say handicap that many elderly leaders or elderly people in the church have, that it's the responsibility of the younger people to turn their own way.
Yeah.
They don't want to take ownership.
Yeah. So one of the ways I do them, people tell me that, I say, are you dead? Are you finished? Are there not spring, summer, fall, winter? And what is it in winter that you have strengths to be a part of? And so I asked them, do they know the God story? Have you prayed? Have you had experience? Have you been an HR person? Do you know about resourcing personnel? What kind of experiences, what kind of skills do you have? Then I wonder with them where God can be calling them to put that back into the congregation. I think there are two things that need to be broke open. One is that we tend to see church work as too slotted. I have to be the Sunday school superintendent or whatever. That's good, but that's not the whole thing. Much of the vocational work that I discovered, spiritual gifts that I discovered, were in fact other kinds of things that the Spirit had given people that we needed to open up into the congregation. So I think it's entering that world together and conversing about it and discovering what it looks like, what the possibilities are. And in that process, what I try to do is to say, what's most interesting to me is discovering what that excitement and spirit is in you. Let's start there and see what happens. We'll pray about it. We'll talk about it. Because I think it's you put your finger on a real impediment.
5 minutes.
All right, one last thing to do. I'd like to have you talk to one other person about this. Everywhere I go, people have their device in front of them. I go to a restaurant and eat, and I look across and there's a family, and they're sitting, and everyone's looking at a device, their iPhone. I'm on the airplane coming down, people are looking at their device. So it's all over, it's part of our culture. I'm wondering, how do you use your iPhone? How does it function in your life? Let's just do a little research together. Start naming. So for example, I use it as a GPS. Great Scott, if I had to go back to maps, it'd be awful. And on the other hand, there are times when I use it when I'm supposed to be listening. I'm playing a simple game. Or I take it up in the car, I sneak a look at it. I hope no one's looking. Shouldn't be doing that. So talk to one another about how you use it. What are some of the ways you use it? Go at it. How do you use your iPhone? Dick told me it's 1 minute. Idea. What if you had 2 or 3 other people with whom you had these conversations in terms of helping each other expand the ways in which an iPhone benefits your quality of life? I've had gray hairs teach me all kinds of things that have really been helpful in terms of how to use an iPhone. I'm a Luddite, I think. And so you all have been really helpful for me. Thanks for being here. I am so jazzed by how many of you are here and working at this. Of course, it's Florida. It's sort of ground zero for good elders, but thanks be to God.